under multiple data recovery efforts conducted across the eastern reaches of the segmentum solar and the bordering regions of the segmentum obscurus. Fragmented pict feeds, auspex logs, and salvaged nospheric transcripts began to form a recurring pattern. These records did not originate from a single source, nor from a unified campaign. They were drawn from merchant convoys, orbital defense stations, void listening posts, and exploratory fleets operating under different authorities and at different times. What unified them was a shared set of anomalies: sudden gravitational fluctuations in otherwise stable systems, unexplained signal saturation across wide spectral bands, and the abrupt disappearance of orbital infrastructure without corresponding debris fields. Eyewitness accounts recovered from astropathic echoes described the same phenomenon with limited variation. Observers reported the emergence of an artificial celestial body of impossible scale, moving with deliberate velocity rather than natural orbital drift. The object exhibited surface structures inconsistent with Imperial or Xenos ship construction, yet it could not be classified as a conventional void craft. It did not broadcast identifiable communications, but its presence alone overwhelmed local sensor arrays, drowning out all other readings. Within hours or days of its arrival, targeted worlds or installations ceased transmission entirely. Early classifications varied widely. Some records labelled the object as a rogue planetoid. Others suggested a mobile star fort or an unregistered Xenos megastructure. Only after decades of comparative analysis did the conclusion emerge that these encounters were manifestations of the same construct, known across multiple battle records and post-engagement reports as the Ork Attack Moon. The Ork Attack Moon is not a singular standardized weapon, but a class of Xenos-engineered mobile planetoids constructed and weaponized by Ork civilizations at the height of their technological and martial convergence. Its origins are inseparable from the Ork species' instinctive relationship with war, industry, and territorial expansion, and its existence represents one of the most extreme expressions of Ork strategic capability ever documented. The earliest confirmed appearances of Ork Attack Moons date back to the latter half of millennia 36, though retrospective analysis suggests experimental precursors may have existed earlier. These constructs were not products of a centralized Ork authority, but rather emerged independently among the largest and most technologically advanced Ork empires. Such empires were typically led by warlords whose dominance extended across multiple systems, supported by vast populations of orcs, grots, and enslaved labor species. Construction of an attack moon began with the acquisition of a suitable celestial body. Asteroid clusters, minor moons, and hollowed planetoids were all viable candidates. The primary requirement was mass. Ork engineering favored overwhelming physical presence over refinement, and greater mass allowed for increased survivability, weapon mounting, and internal capacity. Once captured, the celestial body was stripped, reshaped, and reinforced through extensive mining and fabrication operations carried out directly on its surface. The process of construction was neither orderly nor centrally planned by Imperial standards. Ork Mekboys, whose technical expertise is both instinctive and unpredictable, directed vast labor efforts using crude but effective tools. Metallic superstructures were welded directly into bedrock. Caverns were expanded into manufactoria, hangar bays, and habitation zones. Entire regions of the moon were hollowed out to make room for engines, power cores, and weapons arrays. Structural asymmetry was common, as different warbands contributed components according to their own designs and preferences. Despite this apparent disorder, attack moons consistently demonstrated remarkable structural integrity. This stability is attributed in part to Ork Gestalt psychic influence. As Orks believe their constructions will function, they often do, even when defying conventional engineering principles. Reinforcement plating, void shields of unconventional design, and redundant internal supports allowed these constructs to survive punishment that would annihilate lesser installations. Power generation within an attack moon varied depending on available resources and the preferences of its ruling Mekboys. Most documented examples employed a combination of massive plasma reactors, fusion engines, and scavenged power cores repurposed from captured vessels or installations. These systems were often dangerously unstable by Imperial standards, yet they produced immense energy output. Auxiliary generators, often powered by promethium or other volatile fuels, provided redundancy in the event of catastrophic failure. At the heart of propulsion systems were colossal engine arrays embedded deep within the Moon's mantle. These engines did not operate with the precision of Imperial warp drives. Instead, they functioned as brute force gravitic and plasma thrust mechanisms, allowing the attack moon to maneuver through real space at sublight speeds sufficient for interplanetary travel. For interstellar movement, some attack moons were equipped with crude warp translation systems, often salvaged or replicated from captured technology. These systems were notoriously inaccurate, resulting in unpredictable emergence points and extensive collateral damage upon arrival. Internally, the attack moon functioned as a self-contained ecosystem. Vast industrial zones churned out weapons, armor, vehicles, and munitions on a continuous basis. Forges operated without pause, staffed by orcs and grots working under constant supervision and threat. Waste was recycled into fuel or construction material, while conquered populations were either enslaved or consumed. Entire clans resided within the moon, forming a permanent population that could number in the billions. Environmental conditions inside an attack moon were harsh, but stable by Ork standards. Atmospheres were thick with smoke, metallic particulates, and chemical byproducts. Gravity was uneven, fluctuating depending on proximity to engines or hollowed sections. Illumination came from industrial lighting, open furnaces, and exposed energy conduits. Sound levels were perpetually high, dominated by machinery, weapon testing, and the constant bellowing of Ork inhabitants. The strategic purpose of an attack moon extended beyond simple transportation or firepower. It functioned as a mobile invasion platform capable of launching planetary assaults without reliance on external supply lines. Upon entering a system, the attack moon could deploy fleets of attack craft, boarding torpedoes and drop pods in overwhelming numbers. It could bombard targets directly using surface-mounted weapons or alter orbital mechanics to destabilize planetary defenses. In several recorded engagements, attack moons were deliberately driven into planetary orbits to trigger seismic destabilization. The gravitational mass alone was sufficient to cause tectonic upheaval, atmospheric disruption, and widespread infrastructure collapse. In extreme cases, attack moons were used as kinetic weapons, impacting planetary surfaces directly and rendering worlds uninhabitable within hours. The cultural significance of the attack moon among orcs cannot be overstated. Possession of such a construct was a symbol of absolute dominance. Warbosses who commanded attack moons were regarded as near mythical figures, their authority reinforced by the sheer scale of their war engines. Control of an attack moon often attracted rival warbands, leading to internal conflicts that paradoxically strengthened the construct's population through constant warfare. Imperial attempts to neutralize attack moons were rare and costly. Standard void fleets lacked the concentrated firepower to breach their defenses quickly. Prolonged engagements favored the orcs, whose capacity for on-site repair and reinforcement outpaced Imperial attrition rates. Even when partially disabled, attack moons could remain operational long enough to devastate their targets before withdrawal or destruction. The existence of the Ork Attack Moon challenges many conventional assumptions about Ork technological limitations. While lacking the refinement of ancient Xenos empires or the standardized doctrine of the Imperium, attack moons demonstrate a capacity for large-scale engineering and strategic planning that emerges organically from Ork society under the right conditions. They represent a convergence point where population density, Mekboy innovation, and sustained warfare produce outcomes rivaling the greatest constructs of other civilizations. By the closing centuries of Millennia 41, confirmed sightings of attack moons became less frequent, though this decline is attributed more to incomplete records and the destruction of observing forces than to actual scarcity. Many encounters likely went unrecorded, erased alongside the worlds they targeted. Others may remain classified or misattributed within fragmented archives. What remains clear through surviving documentation is that the Ork Attack Moon is not an anomaly but a recurring outcome of Ork expansion when left unchecked. It is the ultimate expression of their approach to war, overwhelming, improvised and brutally effective, reshaping entire regions of space through sheer mass and aggression. Imperial technical assessments of Ork Attack Moons are necessarily fragmented, drawn from auspex returns gathered under combat conditions, post-engagement debris analysis, and rare long-range observations conducted before sensor saturation or destruction. Despite these limitations, a consistent technical profile emerges across recorded encounters. While individual attack moons vary in configuration and capability, their core specifications follow a recognizable pattern shaped by Ork priorities of scale, redundancy, and overwhelming force. In terms of sheer dimensions, an Ork Attack Moon occupies the threshold between artificial station and minor celestial body. Recorded diameters range from approximately 100 kilometers at the smallest confirmed examples to over 300 kilometers for the largest constructs encountered. This places their mass well beyond that of any Imperial void ship and comparable to small natural moons. Density readings fluctuate significantly due to extensive hollowing, uneven reinforcement, and the presence of massive internal voids dedicated to manufactoria, hangar complexes, and population centers. Structural composition is a composite of natural rock, scavenged metals, and layered armor plating. The original celestial body often forms the core framework, reinforced by ferrosteel girders, adamantium bracing, and crude but thick armor slabs welded directly onto the surface. The resulting exterior is irregular and asymmetrical, with weapon emplacements, towers, and engine housings protruding at inconsistent angles. While lacking the clean geometry of Imperial star forts, this irregularity complicates targeting solutions and distributes impact stress unevenly, increasing survivability under sustained fire. Internal structural strength is further enhanced through redundancy rather than precision. Load-bearing elements are often duplicated multiple times, with secondary supports compensating when primary structures fail. Collapse of internal sections is common during combat, yet catastrophic chain failures are rare. This resilience is partially attributed to Ork construction philosophy, which favours excessive material use and overbuilt components rather than optimized efficiency. Propulsion systems represent one of the most critical and least understood aspects of Attack Moon design. Sublight movement is achieved through vast arrays of plasma thrusters and gravitic engines embedded deep within the Moon's mantle. These engines generate thrust sufficient to alter orbital trajectories, reposition within star systems, and pursue planetary targets. While acceleration is slow by void ship standards due to mass, once momentum is established, the attack moon is difficult to divert or halt. Maximum sublight velocity varies, but recorded estimates suggest attack moons can traverse the distance from system periphery to inner planets within several standard weeks. This speed is strategically significant, as it allows the construct to enter defended systems and close distance before coordinated Imperial response fleets can be fully assembled. Fine maneuvering is limited, but not absent. Attack moons are capable of rotational adjustment, gradual course correction, and controlled orbital insertion, contradicting earlier assumptions that they function as unguided battering rams. Interstellar travel capability is inconsistent across documented examples. Some attack moons possess no independent warp capability and rely on slow system-to-system movement, or are repositioned through the efforts of accompanying Ork fleets. Others are equipped with crude warp translation mechanisms, often integrated from captured or reverse-engineered Imperial or Xenos technology. These systems lack Geller field stability and navigational precision, resulting in highly unpredictable warp exits. Emergence events are frequently accompanied by spatial distortion, widespread electromagnetic disruption, and immediate loss of nearby vessels. Despite these risks, warp-capable attack moons represent an extreme strategic threat. Their arrival is often sudden and poorly predicted, bypassing conventional warning networks. Survival of the construct following warp translation is itself considered evidence of significant structural durability. Defensive capabilities of the Attack Moon are extensive and layered. Void shielding is commonly present, though its nature differs from Imperial equivalents. Rather than uniform shield envelopes, Ork void shields tend to be uneven, fluctuating in strength and coverage. Multiple overlapping generators create zones of high resistance interspersed with weaker areas. While this inconsistency can be exploited with precise targeting, it also results in unpredictable shield behavior that complicates sustained bombardment. Armor plating varies in thickness across the surface, but frequently exceeds that of Imperial battleships by significant margins. In some regions, armor layers reach several hundred meters in combined depth, consisting of overlapping scrap plates, rock, and reinforced metal. Penetration of these layers requires prolonged concentrated fire, during which the Attack Moon continues to advance and retaliate. Offensive armament is distributed across the entire surface and within internal launch bays. Primary weapons include macro cannons of colossal scale, capable of firing projectiles measured in tens of meters. These cannons are often fixed or limited arc, embedded directly into the moon's crust. Their rate of fire is lower than ship-mounted equivalents, but their payload mass and kinetic energy are sufficient to cripple capital ships with single direct hits. Energy weapons are also prevalent. Massive plasma cannons and focused energy projectors provide long-range firepower, capable of engaging orbital targets and planetary surfaces alike. These weapons are powered directly from the moon's primary reactors, granting them sustained firing capability, limited more by heat dissipation than energy availability. Recorded impacts indicate extreme thermal and electromagnetic effects, overwhelming standard void shields and causing secondary system failures. Secondary weapons include thousands of smaller batteries, flak cannons, rapid fire guns, and point defense emplacements designed to counterattack craft and boarding actions. These systems operate with minimal coordination, saturating surrounding space with fire rather than relying on precision. This creates dense kill zones that make conventional assault tactics prohibitively costly. Perhaps the most strategically significant offensive capability lies in the Attack Moon's launch capacity. Internal hangars house vast numbers of Ork voidcraft, ranging from crude fighters to heavy assault vessels. Launch operations are continuous during engagements, with losses rapidly replaced through onboard manufactoria. Boarding torpedoes and assault pods are deployed in overwhelming numbers, targeting enemy vessels and stations simultaneously. Planetary assault capabilities extend beyond conventional bombardment. Many attack moons are equipped with drop mechanisms capable of deploying entire armies directly onto planetary surfaces. These include atmospheric descent craft, armoured landers, and in some recorded cases, deliberately ejected sections of the moon itself containing troops and equipment. Such methods prioritize shock and disruption over survivability, aligning with Ork's strategic preferences. In addition to conventional weaponry, some attack moons incorporate specialized or experimental systems. Gravity manipulation devices have been observed, used to destabilize planetary orbits or disrupt enemy formations. Tractor-beam equivalents enable the capture of vessels or debris for salvage. In rare instances, energy emissions of unknown classification have been recorded, their effects inconsistent and poorly understood, likely reflecting unstable Ork experimentation rather than standardized design. Internal defensive measures further enhance the Attack Moon's strength. Boarding actions against these constructs face extreme resistance. Corridors and chambers are vast, irregular, and heavily fortified. Automated defenses are crude but numerous, supplemented by constant Ork presence. Casualties among defenders are inconsequential by Ork standards, as reinforcements are readily available and combat itself is culturally reinforced. Logistical endurance is effectively indefinite. Onboard resource extraction, recycling, and manufacturing allow the Attack Moon to operate without external resupply for extended periods. Ammunition, fuel, and replacement parts are produced continuously. Damage sustained during combat is often repaired even as engagements continue, with visible structural changes occurring over short timeframes. From a strategic perspective, the combined specifications of the Ork Attack Moon redefine conventional threat assessment. It is simultaneously a fortress, shipyard, population centre, and weapon of planetary scale. Its speed, while limited, is sufficient when paired with its resilience and firepower. Its strength lies not in technological elegance, but in cumulative mass, redundancy, and relentless offensive output. Imperial analysts consistently conclude that destruction of an attack moon requires either overwhelming concentrated force deployed early or highly specialized operations targeting critical internal systems. Both approaches carry extreme risk and resource cost. As a result, many recorded engagements end not with the neutralization of the attack moon, but with strategic withdrawal, containment, or the sacrifice of entire systems to delay its advance. These findings reinforce the assessment that the Ork Attack Moon represents one of the most dangerous mobile war constructs encountered by the Imperium. Its specifications defy standard classification, its weapons surpass conventional fleet engagements, and its strength lies in an ecosystem of war sustained by Ork biology, culture, and belief, functioning as a singular engine of destruction moving through the void. Control of an Ork Attack Moon does not rest with a single pilot in the conventional Imperial sense. There is no centralized command throne, no unified bridge where authority, navigation, and weapons control converge. Instead, governance of an attack moon emerges from layered dominant structures rooted in Ork biology, culture, and hierarchy. At the apex stands the war boss who claims ownership of the construct, though this ownership is maintained not through formal designation, but through sustained violence, reputation, and the ability to command fear and loyalty simultaneously. The war boss associated with an attack moon is invariably among the largest and most aggressive orcs of their era. Physical size, measured in height and mass, correlates strongly with authority. Surviving visual records depict such war bosses as towering figures, often exceeding 4 meters in height, encased in heavily modified mega armor, reinforced with additional plating, power fields, and personal weapon systems. Scarring is extensive, the result of countless internal and external conflicts. These individuals are typically veterans of prolonged interstellar wars, having risen through continuous combat rather than inheritance or appointment. The war boss does not directly steer the attack moon through void space. Navigation, propulsion control, and internal systems are overseen by dominant Mekboy collectives. Among these, a chief Mekboy or Mech Lord often emerges, recognized by peers due to superior technical intuition rather than formal rank. This figure directs engine operations, warp translation attempts where applicable, and large-scale structural modifications. Their authority is tolerated by the war boss because the attack moon's continued function depends on their expertise, though violent disputes between war boss and mech lord are not uncommon. Operational control is therefore distributed. Propulsion zones are manned by Mekboy crews and grots operating under coercion. Weapon sectors answer to nobs appointed by the war boss, each responsible for maintaining and firing specific surface batteries or launch bays. Internal security and troop deployment fall to clan leaders whose allegiance is contingent on access to combat opportunities. The result is a constantly shifting command environment held together by fear, momentum, and the shared objective of war. Despite this fragmentation, attack moons demonstrate coordinated behavior during engagements. This is attributed partly to Ork gestalt cognition. As the population aboard the attack moon increases, collective instinct aligns individual actions toward a shared objective without the need for explicit coordination. Orders are simplified, often reduced to directional intent such as attack, advance, or land, and the Ork population instinctively fills in the operational details. The purpose of an Ork Attack Moon is singular and uncompromising. It exists to bring war to the enemy on a scale that overwhelms resistance before meaningful response can be organized. Unlike Imperial strategic assets designed to defend territory, enforce compliance, or preserve infrastructure, the Attack Moon is an instrument of conquest through annihilation and occupation. Its deployment signals the intent to claim a system entirely, either through extermination or subjugation. Strategically, Attack Moons serve multiple overlapping purposes. They act as mobile staging grounds for war expansions, allowing Ork forces to project power far beyond established territories. They provide secure industrial bases immune to conventional planetary sieges. They function as symbols of dominance that attract additional Ork forces from across surrounding regions, accelerating population growth and military output. Each of these functions reinforces the others, creating a self-amplifying cycle of expansion. In several documented cases, the arrival of an attack moon preceded the collapse of entire subsectors. Even where direct assault was delayed, the psychological impact of its presence disrupted trade routes, forced mass evacuations, and diverted Imperial military resources away from other fronts. The Imperium's inability to rapidly destroy such constructs often resulted in strategic paralysis, as commanders weighed the cost of engagement against the value of the threatened worlds. On a tactical level, the Attack Moon's purpose is also experiential. Ork society thrives on constant conflict. Life aboard an Attack Moon ensures perpetual war, whether against external enemies or internal rivals. This environment produces stronger Orks over time, reinforcing the dominance of the ruling warboss and ensuring the continued relevance of the construct. In this sense, the Attack Moon is not merely a weapon, but a living extension of Ork civilization at its most extreme. The final fate of an Ork Attack Moon varies widely, though survival over extended periods is more common than outright destruction. Imperial records confirm only a limited number of cases where an Attack Moon was conclusively annihilated. Such outcomes typically required extraordinary circumstances, including the deployment of multiple sector fleets, the use of ancient or experimental weapons, or catastrophic internal failures triggered by targeted sabotage. One confirmed method of destruction involves destabilization of the Attack Moon's core power systems. Plasma reactors and engine arrays are often interconnected in ways that prioritize output over containment. When critical nodes are breached, cascading failures can occur. In rare boarding actions where Imperial forces reached these zones, resulting detonations shattered the construct from within. These missions suffered near total casualty rates, and success often relied on precise intelligence obtained at great cost. Another documented fate involves gravitational collapse. Extensive hollowing weakens internal mass distribution. Under sufficient external stress, such as prolonged bombardment combined with forced orbital insertion near a massive planetary body, structural failure can occur. In these instances, the Attack Moon fractures, shedding massive debris fields that devastate nearby space. While this effectively neutralizes the construct, the resulting debris often causes long-term orbital hazards, rendering systems unusable for centuries. More commonly, Attack Moons are lost through miscalculation rather than enemy action. Crude warp translation attempts sometimes result in catastrophic misjumps. Some constructs emerge partially within stellar bodies, planetary atmospheres, or dense asteroid fields. Others fail to emerge at all, presumed destroyed within the warp. These losses are rarely recorded directly, inferred instead from the sudden disappearance of known Ork strongholds and WAG activity. There are also instances where an Attack Moon's fate is absorption rather than destruction. In prolonged campaigns, a victorious Ork empire may dismantle an Attack Moon after its strategic value declines. Components are salvaged, populations redistributed, and the remaining mass repurposed into new constructs or planetary fortifications. In such cases, the Attack Moon ceases to exist as a singular entity, but lives on through its materials and the Orks it sustained. From the perspective of the Imperium, the uncertainty surrounding the fate of many Attack Moons is itself a strategic concern. Absence of evidence does not equate to neutralization. Some constructs may lie dormant, their populations reduced or dispersed, only to be reactivated under a new warboss generations later. Others may operate beyond monitored regions, building strength unnoticed until their reappearance causes renewed devastation. By the late stages of Millennia 41, references to attack moons become increasingly fragmented. This is not indicative of their disappearance, but rather of the Imperium's declining ability to maintain comprehensive records across contested space. Surviving data suggests that while fewer attack moons operate simultaneously, those that do are larger, more heavily armed, and supported by more extensive Ork populations than earlier examples. In summary, the Ork Attack Moon is guided not by a pilot but by dominance, instinct, and collective intent. Its purpose is absolute war, carried across the void without restraint or limitation. Its fate is unpredictable, shaped by internal instability as much as external opposition. Whether destroyed, lost, dismantled, or simply vanished from record, each attack moon leaves a lasting scar on the regions it encounters. As a construct, it represents the logical extreme of Ork capability when unopposed for extended periods. As a threat, it defies conventional deterrence. And as a phenomenon, it underscores a recurring truth within Imperial analysis, that Ork power, when allowed to accumulate unchecked, inevitably manifests not as refinement or permanence, but as overwhelming mass directed toward endless conflict. Surviving records from the Adeptus Administratum and the Adeptus Mechanicus regarding Ork Attack Moons are not consolidated within a single archive. Instead, they exist as dispersed datasets, logistics tallies interrupted mid-entry, fleet requisition requests annotated with emergency seals, fragmented Martian noosphere analyses, and post-action reports filed decades or centuries after the originating events. When these records are examined collectively, a distinct institutional pattern emerges, revealing not only how the Imperium assessed the attack moon as a military threat, but how it struggled to comprehend and administratively contain a phenomenon that defied standard categorization. The earliest Administratum impressions classify the attack moon as a statistical anomaly rather than a discrete strategic asset. Initial reports emphasize discrepancies in shipping losses, population disappearance rates, and unexplained disruptions to tithe flows. Entire systems would abruptly fall silent, yet the expected cascade of refugee traffic, distress signals, or debris fields failed to materialize. Administratum clerks, trained to interpret threats through the lens of supply disruption and compliance failure, initially attributed these anomalies to piracy, local rebellion, or bureaucratic lapse. It was only after repeated cross-sector audits that a pattern of systemic collapse aligned with Mechanicus' exploratory findings. The Administratum's core concern was not the attack moon itself, but its cascading logistical impact. Grain tithes failed to arrive. Forge World output dropped below predictive models. Munitorum projections showed unexplained equipment attrition rates without corresponding battlefield engagements. These discrepancies triggered Mechanicus' involvement, as the magnitude of material loss exceeded what could be explained by conventional conflict. Adeptus Mechanicus impressions differ sharply in tone and focus. Where the Administratum viewed the attack moon as a destabilizing variable within logistical equations, the Mechanicus approached it as a physical system demanding classification. Early Martian data logs describe the construct as an artificially sustained macrostructural mass exhibiting non-standardized engineering coherence. This phrasing reflects a degree of analytical discomfort. The attack moon did not conform to known Xenos megastructure paradigms, nor did it align with established Ork vessel classifications. Mechanicus observers prioritize sensor analytics over narrative accounts. Auspex returns, gravitic distortions, and thermal emissions were catalogued in obsessive detail. These datasets consistently indicated energy outputs exceeding those of Imperial starforts, yet distributed unevenly across the structure. From a Mechanicus perspective, this suggested not inefficiency, but a fundamentally different design logic. Power was not routed according to optimal load balancing. Instead, it appeared to surge toward active zones, responding dynamically to conflict and demand. This observation fed into a controversial Mechanicus hypothesis that the Attack Moon functioned as a reactive system rather than a static platform. Some magos speculated that Ork Gestalt psychic fields influenced energy distribution, effectively guiding power where Orks believed it was needed most. While this theory remains unconfirmed, it is notable that such speculation was formally recorded, indicating the depth of uncertainty faced by even the most technologically adept Imperial institutions. Logistical analysis conducted jointly by the Administratum and Mechanicus paints a picture of extreme self-sufficiency. Attack moons do not rely on supply chains in any recognizable Imperial sense. Resource input is opportunistic rather than scheduled. Captured ships, stripped worlds, and mined asteroids provide raw materials that are immediately processed within the construct. The absence of external dependency rendered many traditional containment strategies ineffective. Blockades, embargoes, and interdiction zones, staples of Imperial war planning, offered minimal long-term impact. Administratum analysts were particularly alarmed by the Attack Moon's effect on regional resource equilibrium. Unlike a planetary invasion, which disrupts a single node, the presence of an Attack Moon created a mobile sinkhole of material. Entire trade routes were abandoned preemptively. Merchant guilds rerouted convoys thousands of light-years off course. These defensive adjustments, while rational at the local level, compounded into sector-wide shortages. Administratum projections show that the mere rumour of an Attack Moon's approach could reduce regional economic output by measurable percentages within a standard year. The Adeptus Mechanicus focused heavily on internal manufacturing capacity. Salvage data and rare internal scans revealed continuous production cycles operating without apparent downtime. Unlike Imperial Forge worlds, which rely on regimented labour shifts and scheduled maintenance, Attack Moon Manufactoria functioned in a state of perpetual overload. Machine failure rates were high, but redundancy compensated. Broken systems were cannibalized immediately, their components recycled into new constructs without documentation or preservation. This absence of standardization confounded Mechanicus predictive models. Normally, output projections rely on known schematics and production templates. The Attack Moon's production logic appeared improvisational yet scalable. Output increased in response to conflict intensity rather than resource availability. When under attack, weapons and munitions production spiked. When preparing for planetary assault, troop transport and armor fabrication surged. From an Imperial standpoint, this behavior resembled adaptive biological metabolism more than industrial manufacturing. Administratum logistics officers noted a related phenomenon: attrition asymmetry. Engagements with Attack Moons resulted in disproportionate Imperial losses relative to observable Ork depletion. Even when significant damage was inflicted, follow-up assessments showed minimal long-term reduction in Ork operational capacity. Replacement forces appeared rapidly, often stronger and more numerous than before. This challenged the Administratum's foundational assumption that sustained losses inevitably degrade enemy capability. Joint analytic reports attempted to quantify the Attack Moon's population and throughput. Estimates varied widely. Conservative projections suggested populations in the low billions. More extreme assessments proposed figures exceeding tens of billions, though these were flagged as statistically unreliable. What all reports agreed upon was that population density was directly correlated with combat exposure. The longer an Attack Moon remained engaged, the larger and more aggressive its internal population became. The Adeptus Mechanicus expressed particular concern over technological drift. Recovered wreckage and battle recordings show that Attack Moon weapon systems evolved over time. Later encounters often featured improved firing rates, heavier payloads, or novel configurations not observed in earlier engagements. This suggested not only iterative refinement, but experiential learning. Ork Mekboys appeared to incorporate battlefield feedback directly into design, bypassing the lengthy validation cycles required by Imperial doctrine. Administratum reaction to this finding was largely procedural rather than strategic. Records show increased frequency of threat reclassification, emergency tithe exemptions, and population evacuation authorizations. Entire worlds were downgraded from productive assets to delay zones, intended to slow the attack moon's advance rather than survive it. This shift marks a rare acknowledgement within administratum planning that certain threats could not be neutralized efficiently and must instead be managed through sacrifice. Mechanicus discourse, by contrast, became increasingly fractured. Some magi advocated for direct study, proposing dangerous close-range observation missions to better understand attack moon systems. Others argued for immediate extermination protocols, citing the existential risk posed by uncontrolled Ork technological escalation. These internal disagreements delayed unified response and resulted in inconsistent field directives. Logistical simulations conducted in late millennia, 41 attempted to model long-term outcomes of unchecked attack moon activity. Results were uniformly catastrophic. Even conservative models showed exponential regional destabilization within centuries. Forge world isolation, agri-world collapse, and cumulative fleet losses compounded beyond recovery thresholds. These simulations, while classified, influenced high-level policy decisions, including the authorization of extreme measures previously reserved for Tyrannid hive fleets, or Necron tomb world awakenings. Despite this, administratum implementation lagged. Bureaucratic inertia, competing crises, and the sheer scale of Imperial territory meant that attack moons were often addressed reactively rather than proactively. Mechanicus warnings were acknowledged, archived, and frequently superseded by more immediate threats. In several documented cases, data indicating the early formation of an attack moon was filed but not acted upon until the construct reached full operational capability. Taken together, Adeptus Administratum and Adeptus Mechanicus impressions reveal a shared conclusion reached through different paths. The Ork Attack Moon is not merely a weapon but a logistical singularity. It absorbs resources, disrupts systems, and accelerates Ork expansion in ways that undermine the Imperium's foundational strengths of scale and supply. Traditional metrics of victory fail to apply. Loss ratios, territorial control, and production output lose meaning when faced with a construct that converts conflict itself into growth. These findings underpin later, more drastic doctrines explored in subsequent records. But even at this stage, the institutional consensus is clear. The Ork Attack Moon represents a failure point in Imperial logistics and predictive control, a threat whose true danger lies not only in its guns or mass, but in its ability to unmake the assumptions upon which Imperial administration depends. Recorded engagements involving Ork Attack Moons are comparatively rare, not due to infrequency of contact, but because few encounters produce surviving observers or intact data. The battles that are documented tend to exist at the intersection of catastrophe and partial success, where Imperial forces either delayed the construct long enough to transmit records or inflicted damage sufficient to warrant post-action analysis. From these fragmented accounts, the Adeptus Administratum and Adeptus Mechanicus assembled a composite picture of how attack moons fight, how they are employed in war, and how their presence reshapes the battle space. The earliest detailed battle records date to the latter decades of Millennia 36, when an Ork empire operating near the galactic north constructed what is believed to be one of the first fully realized attack moons. Administratum convoy logs note sudden void traffic losses, followed by the disappearance of 3 minor agri-worlds within a single standard year. Mechanicus exploratory vessels dispatched to investigate encountered extreme gravitic anomalies and signal saturation before being destroyed. Only automated probes transmitted usable data, capturing low-resolution pict feeds of a massive artificial moon, entering high orbit around the primary target world. In this engagement, Imperial doctrine treated the construct as a fortified station rather than a mobile planetary-scale weapon. Battle groups were deployed in standard formation, attempting to engage at long range while maintaining orbital defense around the planet. This approach proved ineffective. The attack moon advanced steadily, absorbing fire that would have crippled multiple capital ships. Its return fire focused not on Imperial warships initially, but on orbital infrastructure. Defense platforms, shipyards, and communication arrays were eliminated first, isolating the system before the main fleet engagement began. This pattern becomes a defining feature of Attack Moon fighting style. Rather than immediately seeking fleet annihilation, the construct prioritizes removal of command and logistical nodes. Administratum analysts note that this approach mirrors siege doctrine more than naval warfare. By dismantling the enemy's ability to coordinate and resupply, the Attack Moon transforms the engagement into a series of isolated skirmishes it can overwhelm at leisure. Once orbital dominance is established, the Attack Moon shifts posture. Weapon fire intensifies, targeting capital ships with concentrated salvos. Macro-cannon barrages are used to force enemy vessels into predictable evasive patterns, while secondary batteries saturate surrounding space to deny maneuvering corridors. Ork Attack craft launch continuously throughout this phase, not as precision strike units, but as expendable harassment forces. Their role is to exhaust point defenses, disrupt formations, and create openings for boarding actions. Boarding warfare is central to Attack Moon doctrine. Mechanicus combat logs describe waves of boarding torpedoes and assault pods launched in quantities exceeding defensive interception capacity. Even heavily shielded Imperial battleships faced multiple hull breaches within minutes. Once aboard, Ork forces prioritized disabling engines and weapons rather than seizing control. Ships rendered immobile or silent are either abandoned or destroyed by follow-up fire. Several notable battles illustrate variations of this core approach. In the conflict recorded as the Gathalamor Periphery engagement, an Attack Moon emerged from an unstable warp translation, within a fortified system already hosting 3 Imperial fleet elements. The sudden arrival disrupted formation cohesion, and the Attack Moon immediately altered local gravitational conditions, forcing several smaller vessels into collision or uncontrolled drift. Within the first standard hour, nearly a third of the defending fleet was neutralized without direct weapons fire. In this engagement, Imperial commanders attempted a concentrated strike against the Attack Moon's engine regions. Mechanicus targeting data suggested exposed propulsion housings near the construct's southern hemisphere. While the assault inflicted visible damage, internal records show that power rerouting compensated within minutes. Weapon output did not decrease. Instead, return fire intensified, suggesting that damage to one system triggered increased output in others. This adaptive response reinforced the perception of the Attack Moon as a reactive system rather than a static target. Planetary assaults follow a similarly brutal logic. Once a target world is selected, the Attack Moon enters low orbit or a stable gravity lock. Bombardment begins immediately, focusing on void shield generators, hive spires, and major population centers. Precision is irrelevant. The goal is mass disruption. Administratum casualty estimates from these phases often exceed billions within the first standard day, with infrastructure collapse occurring almost simultaneously across multiple continents. Following bombardment, ground forces are deployed en masse. Attack Moons release entire armies in rapid succession, overwhelming planetary defenses through sheer volume. Drop zones are not secured or cleared. Ork forces land directly into active combat zones, absorbing losses until momentum is established. Mechanicus observers note that this approach accelerates adaptation. Ork surviving initial landings rapidly adjust tactics, equipment usage, and movement patterns based on immediate battlefield feedback. A well-documented case is the fall of the Forge world Charon's Reach, where an Attack Moon maintained orbital presence for over 6 standard months. During this period, continuous ground assault was sustained without measurable reduction in Ork output. Mechanicus logs detail the destruction of multiple Titan legions and the eventual scuttling of the primary forge complexes to prevent capture. Despite these measures, Ork's salvage operations recovered significant quantities of advanced technology, later observed incorporated into subsequent Attack Moon weapon systems. Fighting style analysis emphasizes psychological and informational warfare as secondary effects rather than deliberate strategies. The sheer scale of the Attack Moon induces command paralysis. Communications degrade under sensor interference. Tactical doctrines break down as established assumptions fail. Administratum after action reviews repeatedly cite delayed decision-making and contradictory orders as contributing factors to defeat. The Attack Moon's presence overwhelms not only defences but also institutional response mechanisms. In void engagements, Attack Moons rarely retreat in the conventional sense. Withdrawal, when it occurs, is gradual and opportunistic. The construct may disengage after inflicting sufficient damage, harvesting debris and capturing survivors. In some cases, it remains within a system long after organised resistance has collapsed, continuing to strip resources before moving on. This prolonged occupation further degrades the Imperium's ability to reclaim the region. There are, however, instances of partial Imperial success. In the battle designated the Helican Rift Containment Action, coordinated long-range fire combined with a targeted infiltration mission disrupted internal command cohesion. While the Attack Moon was not destroyed, its advance was slowed significantly, allowing for evacuation of key worlds. Administratum records classify this as a strategic success despite the loss of the system, highlighting the altered criteria for victory when facing such constructs. Across all recorded battles, several constants persist. The Attack Moon dictates the pace and structure of the engagement. It absorbs losses that would cripple conventional forces without apparent degradation. Its fighting style prioritizes isolation, saturation, and adaptation over precision or efficiency. Victory from the Ork perspective is not measured by territory held or enemies destroyed, but by the continuation of war itself. These battle records collectively reinforce the conclusion that an Ork Attack Moon is not merely participating in war, but redefining it within the affected region. Each engagement becomes less about tactical maneuver and more about whether the Imperium can delay the inevitable long enough to preserve assets elsewhere. In this context, every recorded battle is both a confrontation and a case study in systemic failure, revealing the limits of Imperial military doctrine when confronted with a weaponized world that turns conflict into its primary resource. Later, Administratum and Mechanicus records concerning Ork Attack Moons shift noticeably in tone and structure. Where earlier documents focused on immediate threat assessment and battlefield survival, later entries emphasize damage reconciliation, demographic loss accounting, and long-term systemic degradation. These records are often compiled decades after the events they describe, reconstructed from fragmentary data, survivor testimony, and secondary indicators such as tithe collapse and star chart revisions. In many cases, the battles themselves are only partially described, their existence inferred from absence rather than presence. One such case involves the disappearance of the Morvant Drift Cluster during the early centuries of Millennia 41. Administratum shipping ledgers record normal activity across 6 inhabited systems, followed by a sharp cessation of all traffic within a 12-month span. No distress calls were logged. No refugee convoys emerged. The only anomaly preceding the collapse was a brief period of increased auspex interference, reported by a Mechanicus listening station 2 systems away. Subsequent exploratory fleets found extensive debris fields in high orbit around the primary worlds, stripped planets with destabilized crusts, and no surviving infrastructure capable of transmission. Mechanicus forensic analysis of the debris identified weapon signatures consistent with heavy macro-projectile impacts and sustained plasma bombardment. The pattern matched those previously attributed to Attack Moon engagements. However, no direct observation of the construct exists in this case. Administratum classification therefore lists the Morvant Drift as a probable Attack Moon consumption event, a designation that carries logistical implications even without absolute confirmation. Other battle records are more explicit. In the Helior subsector suppression attempts, Imperial forces engaged an Attack Moon across multiple systems over a prolonged period rather than a single decisive confrontation. Fleet elements conducted repeated harassment strikes, targeting peripheral Ork forces and attempting to disrupt supply acquisition. While these actions inflicted measurable losses on accompanying Ork fleets, the Attack Moon itself remained largely untouched. Mechanicus logs note that repeated minor engagements appeared to strengthen internal Ork cohesion, accelerating population growth and weapons output aboard the construct. The aftermath of this campaign reveals a critical administratum insight. Prolonged containment without decisive action may worsen long-term outcomes. Systems designated as buffer zones suffered complete economic collapse within 2 centuries. Agri-worlds left unprotected for evacuation became uninhabitable wastelands. Forge world output declined permanently due to loss of skilled labour and infrastructure. Even worlds not directly attacked experienced tithe failures as trade networks collapsed under sustained instability. Another documented engagement, known administratively as the Carthax exclusion failure, highlights the risks of delayed response. Early warning indicators suggested Ork consolidation within an asteroid belt, including abnormal mining activity and increased Mekboy traffic. These indicators were logged but deprioritized due to concurrent conflicts elsewhere. By the time confirmation was obtained, the asteroid mass had already been converted into a partially functional attack moon. Attempts at early interdiction failed when Imperial forces encountered unexpectedly heavy defenses and were forced to withdraw. Within 3 standard years, the completed attack moon had eradicated 4 neighbouring systems. Administratum post-event analysis explicitly cites procedural delay as a primary causal factor. This case becomes a reference point in later doctrine discussions, illustrating that early detection without decisive action offers little benefit against such constructs. The aftermath of confirmed attack moon destruction events is equally instructive. In rare cases where Imperial forces succeeded in neutralizing a construct, the surrounding region often remained devastated for centuries. Debris fields generated by the destruction of a moon-scale structure rendered orbital zones hazardous. Planetary orbits were altered. In one recorded instance, fragments from a destroyed attack moon caused secondary extinction events on 2 previously untouched worlds within the same system. Mechanicus surveys of these regions reveal long-term contamination. Radiation, exotic energy residues, and unstable gravity pockets persist long after the battle. Reconstruction is slow and resource-intensive. Administratum planners therefore note that even successful engagements may result in net strategic loss when measured against the cost of reclamation. From the Adeptus Administratum perspective, the cumulative analysis leads to a grim conclusion. Ork Attack Moons cannot be treated as isolated military threats. They function as moving centres of economic annihilation. Their impact radiates outward through trade disruption, population displacement, and administrative overload. Traditional victory metrics fail to capture this effect. A system saved militarily may still be lost economically within a few generations due to surrounding instability. Administratum final reports increasingly frame attack moons as extinction-level regional events rather than enemy units. Policy recommendations emphasize evacuation prioritization, tithe suspension, and strategic abandonment rather than defense. This represents a significant doctrinal shift, acknowledging that preservation of the wider Imperium may require the sacrifice of entire subsectors when confronted with unchecked Ork megastructures. The Adeptus Mechanicus arrives at a parallel but distinct conclusion. Their final analyses focus less on territory and more on technological trajectory. Mechanicus records emphasize that each prolonged attack moon campaign results in accelerated Ork innovation. Salvaged Imperial technology is not merely reused but transformed. Later encounters consistently demonstrate improved integration of captured systems, heavier weapon outputs, and more resilient structural configurations. One Mechanicus synthesis report states that attack moons act as evolutionary engines for Ork technology. Continuous exposure to high-intensity warfare creates a feedback loop where failure is immediately corrected through modification. Unlike Imperial development cycles, which are constrained by dogma and validation protocols, Ork adaptation occurs in real time. This places the Imperium at a systemic disadvantage in prolonged conflicts. The Mechanicus also notes a troubling trend in data consistency. Later attack moons appear more standardized in their core functions despite surface-level chaos. Power distribution becomes more reliable. Warp translation survival rates improve. Weapon arrays show increased redundancy and overlapping coverage. These findings suggest that knowledge gained from earlier constructs propagates through Ork populations over time, even without formal documentation. Final Mechanicus recommendations therefore prioritize prevention over engagement. Early identification of large-scale Ork industrial convergence is flagged as critical. Several sealed advisories propose immediate extermination measures at the pre-construction stage, even when evidence remains circumstantial. These proposals often conflict with administratum requirements for verification and authorization, leading to continued delays in implementation. Joint administratum and mechanicus summaries produced late in millennia 41 attempt to reconcile these perspectives. The resulting analysis frames the Ork Attack Moon as a phenomenon that exploits the Imperium's structural weaknesses. Its decentralized nature bypasses bureaucratic response chains. Its self-sufficiency nullifies economic warfare. Its adaptive growth undermines attritional strategies. Its sheer scale overwhelms localized defense planning. The final assessment is notably restrained in language, avoiding alarmist phrasing while delivering severe conclusions. The Ork Attack Moon is identified as a strategic class threat whose successful counter requires early, unified, and disproportionate response. Failure to act decisively at the earliest indicators results in cascading losses that cannot be reversed through later military success alone. In closing, Chapter 2 records do not describe a single war or series of battles, but an evolving pattern of imperial response and failure. Each additional engagement adds clarity while reducing options. From the perspective of both the Adeptus Administratum and the Adeptus Mechanicus, the Attack Moon is not merely a weapon to be destroyed, but a systemic challenge that exposes the limits of imperial logistics, doctrine, and foresight. By the time its presence is fully acknowledged, the damage is already irreversible. Inquisitorial records concerning Ork Attack Moons are markedly different in character from those of the Adeptus Administratum and the Adeptus Mechanicus. Where other institutions attempt classification, measurement and procedural response, the Inquisition approaches the phenomenon through risk, anomaly, and existential deviation. As a result, Inquisition archives are sparse, heavily redacted, and often contradictory, not because of ignorance, but because of deliberate compartmentalization. No single Ordo maintains a complete account. Instead, observations are scattered across Ordo Xenos threat assessments, Ordo Malleus anomaly notices, and Ordo Hereticus jurisdictional disputes arising from systemic collapse and loss of imperial authority. The earliest Inquisition impressions do not treat the Ork Attack Moon as a technological construct alone. Initial sealed memoranda classify it as a convergence event, defined as a circumstance in which material, biological, and immaterial forces intersect in ways that destabilize established causality. This framing places the Attack Moon outside conventional Xenos war engines, and closer to phenomena typically associated with large-scale warp incursions or Tyrannid hive fleet manifestations. Inquisitorial observers note that the presence of an Attack Moon alters more than the tactical environment. Astropathic choirs operating within affected regions report severe signal distortion even before visual or auspex confirmation. Messages arrive fragmented, delayed, or emotionally saturated with panic unrelated to sender disposition. In several cases, astropaths experience synchronized visions of impact, noise, and pressure long before the Attack Moon entered real space proximity. These effects were initially attributed to fear or contamination, but repeated correlation across unrelated choirs led to formal inquiry. Ordo Xenos analysts proposed that the Attack Moon's immense Ork population generated an unusually dense Gestalt psychic field. Unlike warp entities, this field does not manifest as a coherent presence, nor does it respond to ritual or psychic probing. Instead, it exerts passive influence, amplifying aggression, urgency, and fatalism among nearby populations. Civilians, Imperial Guard units, and even Void crew, exposed to prolonged proximity, exhibit increased incidents of insubordination, impulsive behavior, and breakdown of hierarchical discipline. Inquisitorial reports emphasize that these effects occur without identifiable demonic signatures. No increase in warp predators, no evidence of possession, and no consistent ritual contamination accompanies the phenomenon. This absence is itself flagged as anomalous. Ordo Malleus observers explicitly note that the psychic disturbance generated by an attack moon appears orthogonal to the warp rather than derived from it. This challenges established Imperial metaphysics, which generally classifies psychic effects as either sanctioned or warp-sourced. Further observations deepen this concern. In multiple engagements, Geller fields aboard Imperial vessels remained stable during proximity to an attack moon, yet crew members reported sensations commonly associated with warp exposure. These included temporal disorientation, auditory hallucinations of mechanical noise or shouting, and a pervasive sense of inevitability. Tech priests monitoring machine spirits recorded heightened activity levels without corresponding external stimuli, as if systems were reacting to pressure that instruments could not detect. One sealed Inquisition transcript describes the phenomenon as psychic mass, an unverified concept suggesting that sufficiently large populations of orcs may generate a field effect analogous to gravity, influencing probability and behavior without direct interaction. This remains unconfirmed and is categorized as speculative, but its inclusion within official Inquisition discourse underscores the difficulty of applying existing frameworks to the attack moon. Visual observation yields additional anomalies. Pict feeds recovered from destroyed reconnaissance probes show surface activity that defies logistical plausibility. Weapon emplacements appear to shift position between frames without evidence of construction or movement. Damage inflicted by Imperial fire sometimes appears partially reversed in subsequent scans, not through repair, but through structural reconfiguration. These observations are not consistent enough to prove regeneration, yet frequent enough to warrant attention. Inquisitorial observers caution against overinterpretation, noting that sensor distortion and incomplete data could account for some discrepancies. However, cross-comparison of independent recordings reduces the likelihood of pure error. Ordo Xenos marginal notes repeatedly reference the phrase belief-reinforced matter, echoing earlier Mechanicus hypotheses, but framing them as a potential threat vector rather than an engineering curiosity. The most troubling Inquisition findings concern causality violations during recorded battles. In several engagements, Imperial forces experienced statistically improbable equipment failures clustered around moments of high Ork aggression. Weapons jammed despite recent maintenance. Void shields collapsed without energy depletion. Targeting systems locked onto non-existent contacts. While such events occur in war, Inquisition analysis highlights their frequency and concentration during attack moon engagements as exceeding acceptable variance. Attempts to isolate these effects through controlled observation failed. Inquisitorial kill teams deployed to monitor Ork activity aboard lesser warhulks reported similar phenomena but at reduced intensity. This led to the conclusion that scale is a critical factor. The attack moon's size and population density appear to push Ork gestalt effects beyond thresholds observed in smaller constructs. Several sealed Ordo Malleus files raise the question of whether the attack moon represents a proto-immaterial entity, not a demon, but a self-reinforcing psychic structure anchored entirely in real space. These files stress that no evidence supports demonic intelligence or warp origin. Instead, they speculate that the Ork species, through sheer numbers and belief, may create localized reality distortion without accessing the warp directly. This hypothesis remains unproven and controversial, as it implies a mechanism of power outside the Imperium's established understanding of psychic phenomena. Inquisitorial encounters with attack moons also reveal anomalies in temporal perception. Survivors of prolonged engagements consistently report distorted memory sequences. Events are recalled out of order. Timeframes collapse or expand subjectively. In some cases, entire days of combat are unaccounted for in personal recollection, despite corroborating logs confirming continuous activity. Medical examinations find no evidence of neurological damage sufficient to explain the phenomenon. Chronological discrepancies extend to record keeping. In several systems, Administratum and Mechanicus timestamps diverge by hours or days, when referencing the same events. While minor discrepancies are common in large conflicts, the consistency of such divergence during Attack Moon engagements prompted Inquisition review. No evidence of warp translation during these periods exists, further complicating interpretation. Another unexplainable finding involves Ork behavior itself. Inquisitorial observers note that Orks aboard Attack Moons exhibit unusually cohesive strategic behavior without apparent central command. This exceeds even expected Ork norms. Large-scale maneuvers occur without communication signals detectable by Imperial instruments. Entire warbands adjust tactics simultaneously across vast internal distances. This synchronization suggests a level of non-verbal coordination that remains unexplained. Attempts to disrupt this cohesion through decapitation strikes yielded inconsistent results. In some cases, the death of a dominant warboss resulted in temporary disarray. In others, operational efficiency increased following leadership removal, as if the structure adapted to the loss instantly. Inquisitorial analysts conclude that leadership within an Attack Moon is less hierarchical than it appears, with authority distributed through collective momentum rather than command chains. Perhaps the most heavily sealed findings concern the aftermath of Attack Moon withdrawal or destruction. Inquisitorial survey teams dispatched to affected systems report lingering anomalies decades later. These include unexplained fluctuations in planetary magnetic fields, abnormal Ork resurgence among feral populations, and persistent psychological effects among surviving humans. Even generations after the event, affected populations display heightened aggression, increased tolerance for violence, and cultural shifts toward conflict-oriented values. Ordo Hereticus involvement arises primarily from these aftermath conditions. Worlds recovering from Attack Moon encounters frequently experience breakdowns in Imperial law, emergence of unauthorized militias, and deviations from sanctioned worship practices. While no direct heretical movements are consistently linked to the phenomenon, the erosion of authority and increased violence create fertile ground for broader instability. Inquisitorial consensus does not attribute these effects to corruption or infection. Instead, they are described as imprinting, a non-transmissible residual influence left by prolonged exposure to extreme Ork gestalt presence. This imprinting does not spread actively, but it alters the trajectory of societies already weakened by devastation. The Inquisition's final impression in this phase of documentation is notably cautious. No unified theory is endorsed. No definitive classification is assigned beyond the designation of extreme Xenos existential threat. Repeated annotations emphasize uncertainty, warning against premature conclusions, yet the tone is unmistakably severe. The Ork Attack Moon is recorded not only as a weapon of war, but as a destabilizing force that operates across physical, psychological, and possibly metaphysical domains without fitting into known categories. It does not require warp corruption, heretical cults, or demonic pacts to undermine Imperial order. Its mere presence alters behavior, perception, and outcome. For the Inquisition, this is perhaps the most alarming aspect. A threat that cannot be cleanly labelled, cannot be cleanly purged. The Attack Moon resists reduction to doctrine. It cannot be countered solely with faith, firepower, or procedure. Each observation adds data while deepening uncertainty. As recorded in multiple sealed marginalia, the Inquisition's primary concern is not what the Ork Attack Moon is, but what it implies. If sufficient mass, belief, and violence can reshape reality without recourse to the warp, then established boundaries between material and immaterial threats may be incomplete. This implication remains unconfirmed, but it underpins the increasingly restrictive classification of all data related to Attack Moons. By the end of these records, the Inquisition does not claim understanding. It claims vigilance. The Ork Attack Moon is watched, catalogued, and feared, not because it breaks Imperial law, but because it operates beyond Imperial explanation. Inquisition documentation addressing anomalies observed during wars involving Ork Attack Moons becomes progressively more restricted as records advance through Millennia 41. Unlike Administratum or Mechanicus archives, which attempt continuity, Inquisition files are episodic and deliberately incomplete. Each documented encounter is isolated, stripped of wider context, and cross-referenced only through ciphered marginalia. This structure reflects a conscious decision to prevent pattern recognition outside authorized circles, suggesting that the anomalies recorded were judged as destabilizing not only to strategic planning, but to institutional confidence itself. One of the earliest sealed reports originates from an Ordo Xenos observation cell embedded within a battle group assigned to intercept an attack moon approaching the Netherus Veil. Fleet engagement data initially followed expected patterns. Weapon discharge, shield impact and casualty rates aligned with projections derived from prior encounters. The anomaly emerged not in outcome, but in sequence. Inquisitorial analysts reviewing synchronized logs discovered that several capital ships registered confirmed damage before corresponding enemy fire was recorded. In some cases, hull breaches were logged seconds before Ork weapons discharged, according to auspex timestamps. At first, these discrepancies were attributed to sensor lag or corrupted data streams. However, comparison across independent systems revealed consistent offset patterns. Shipboard chronometers, machine spirit logs, and crew testimony all agreed internally yet disagreed with external reference points. The discrepancy did not persist beyond the engagement, nor did it escalate into full temporal displacement. It remained localized and transient, resisting conventional explanation. Another encounter, sealed under Ordo Malleus authority despite the absence of demonic indicators, occurred during the defense of the Lorthane Expanse. Imperial forces reported sudden collapses in void shield coherence during moments of heightened Ork assault, despite full power availability and intact generators. Post-engagement inspection confirmed no sabotage, overload, or mechanical fault. Machine spirits interrogated afterward registered compliance and confusion, responding to litanies as if they had experienced pressure without cause. What elevated this incident beyond technical curiosity was the pattern repetition. Identical shield failures were recorded across multiple vessels simultaneously, regardless of class or configuration. The common factor was proximity to the attack moon and intensity of Ork surface activity at the time. Inquisitorial notes caution against warp attribution, emphasizing that no empiric surge, no demonic manifestation, and no psychic resonance consistent with known warp phenomena were present. Several documented battles include anomalies related to probability rather than mechanics. Ordo Xenos statistical reviews highlight repeated occurrences of extreme outcome clustering. Imperial volleys that should have inflicted catastrophic damage instead dispersed harmlessly, striking reinforced sections or being deflected by debris. Conversely, Ork fire frequently achieved maximum lethality under conditions where accuracy should have been degraded. While individual instances could be dismissed as chance, cumulative analysis across multiple engagements revealed deviation from expected distribution models beyond acceptable margins. Inquisitorial marginalia describe this as outcome bias, an unproven condition wherein conflict dynamics appear skewed towards sustaining Ork momentum rather than determining victory. This bias does not guarantee Ork success in every engagement, but it increases the likelihood that battles extend, intensify, and escalate rather than resolve cleanly. The implication is not invulnerability but persistence. Documented encounters involving boarding actions reveal further irregularities. Kill teams deployed into attack moon interiors consistently report disorientation disproportionate to environmental conditions. Corridors appear to reconfigure subtly between movements. Distance estimation becomes unreliable. Teams advancing along mapped routes arrive at unexpected locations without detecting turns or deviations. In some cases, biometric telemetry shows operatives maintaining steady pace and orientation while visual feeds contradict their reported movement. These phenomena do not escalate into full spatial distortion. No impossible geometries are recorded. Instead, the effect resembles microscale rearrangement, as if internal structures shift incrementally in response to movement or intent. Mechanicus explanations invoking mechanical reconfiguration fail to account for the speed and lack of detectable machinery operation. Inquisitorial analysts again caution restraint, noting that Ork construction chaos and sensor interference could explain some effects, yet repeated consistency across unrelated teams elevates concern. One particularly sealed report describes a kill team insertion targeting a suspected primary reactor complex. According to mission logs, the team reached the target zone, confirmed reactor presence, and initiated demolition protocols. However, subsequent scans of the area revealed no evidence of reactor damage. Worse, follow-up observation detected continued power output from an apparently identical complex located elsewhere within the structure. Whether this represents redundant architecture, misidentification, or something more anomalous remains unresolved. The team did not survive extraction to clarify. Fleet engagements occasionally produce anomalies involving enemy losses. In several battles, Ork surface casualties inflicted by sustained bombardment exceeded plausible replacement rates, yet operational output did not decline. In some cases, output increased. Inquisitorial analysts reject regeneration as an explanation, citing lack of biological evidence. Instead, they propose a population flux model, suggesting that internal Ork redistribution and rapid maturation may obscure attrition effects. This theory remains speculative, flagged as unsupported but pragmatically useful. Sealed reports also address anomalous communications phenomena. Vox traffic intercepted from attack moons is largely incoherent by Imperial linguistic standards, yet patterns emerge under deep analysis. Ordo-Xenos cryptographers note rhythmic repetition, escalation cycles, and synchronized shifts in broadcast intensity that correlate with battlefield developments. These transmissions do not convey actionable intelligence, but they appear to reinforce Ork cohesion across vast internal distances without reliance on command hierarchy. Astropathic anomalies intensify during major engagements. In some cases, astropaths report hearing structured noise resembling machinery, or chanting rather than voices. Others describe overwhelming sensory impressions without imagery or language. These experiences are not shared uniformly, but clusters emerge among individuals operating near attack moon engagements. Inquisition Medical Review finds no consistent psychic pathology, nor evidence of possession. The effects dissipate once distance increases, leaving residual psychological stress rather than corruption. Several Ordo Hereticus sealed files document post-battle anomalies in liberated or abandoned systems. These include spontaneous Ork resurgence on worlds previously cleared, emergence of unusually large feral Ork populations within short timeframes, and increased incidents of violent behavior among human survivors. While none of these phenomena breach heretical thresholds independently, their convergence raises concern. Inquisition analysis suggests that exposure to prolonged Ork Gestalt presence may alter ecological and sociological baselines without introducing overt corruption. One of the most restricted reports involves a failed exterminatus authorization during an attack moon engagement. According to sealed transcripts, the targeting solution for a cyclonic torpedo strike repeatedly failed to lock despite stable conditions. Multiple guidance systems returned conflicting data, preventing authorization. When manual override was attempted, the attack moon altered trajectory unexpectedly, exiting the firing envelope without detectable propulsion change. The authorization was ultimately rescinded due to risk of collateral impact on inhabited worlds. No explanation for the targeting failure is recorded. Inquisitorial commentary surrounding this event is sparse but revealing. Marginal notes emphasize that no hostile interference was detected. The systems behaved within parameters, yet outcomes diverged. This reinforces the recurring theme within Inquisition records that attack moon anomalies operate not through overt force, but through subtle disruption of expectation, timing, and coordination. Attempts to consolidate these anomalies into a unified framework are rare and heavily redacted. One internal synthesis document proposes that the attack moon acts as a coherence amplifier, aligning Ork intent and action while degrading enemy synchronization. This effect is not active manipulation, but passive dominance, emerging from scale rather than design. the document explicitly rejects warp agency, demonic intelligence, and sentient control, framing the phenomenon as emergent rather than deliberate. Such conclusions remain controversial even within the Inquisition. Other sealed responses argue that overinterpretation risks mythologizing a material threat. They emphasize the dangers of attributing causality to coincidence under stress. These dissenting views are preserved alongside more speculative analyses, reflecting the Inquisition's commitment to uncertainty rather than premature certainty. Across all sealed reports, one operational conclusion recurs. Engagements with Ork Attack Moons degrade not only material assets, but informational integrity. Data becomes unreliable, chronology fractures, cause and effect blur at the margins. This degradation persists even in victory, complicating post-action review and future planning. The Attack Moon leaves behind not only physical devastation, but epistemic damage, eroding confidence in records and analysis. The Inquisition's role in these circumstances shifts accordingly. Rather than seeking comprehensive understanding, it prioritizes containment of interpretation. Knowledge is segmented, correlations are restricted, patterns are obscured intentionally to prevent destabilizing conclusions from spreading beyond cleared circles. This approach is reflected in the structure of the archives themselves, where related events are filed separately, linked only by encrypted cross-references. In the closing assessments of this phase of documentation, inquisitorial language becomes increasingly restrained. There are no proclamations of forbidden truth, no definitive warnings of unseen gods or hidden intelligences. Instead, the emphasis is on operational humility. The Attack Moon is recorded as a phenomenon that consistently exceeds predictive models, without violating known laws outright. It bends expectation without breaking reality. For the Inquisition, this makes the Ork Attack Moon uniquely dangerous. It does not announce itself through corruption, blasphemy, or demonic incursion. It advances through accumulation, belief, and violence until resistance becomes structurally unsustainable. Its anomalies do not invalidate Imperial doctrine, but they expose its blind spots. The Ork Attack Moon cannot be understood solely through weapons fire or casualty figures. Its anomalies manifest in timing, probability, perception, and coordination. These effects do not require belief in the supernatural, yet they undermine the assumptions upon which Imperial certainty depends. For the Inquisition, this places the Attack Moon among the most unsettling Xenos threats recorded, not because it breaks reality, but because it operates just close enough to normality to resist explanation while inflicting irreversible consequence. The final tier of inquisitorial documentation concerning Ork Attack Moons is restricted beyond standard Ordo clearance, filed under cross-Ordo authority and segmented by need-to-know protocols. These classified files are not battlefield reports nor analytical summaries. They are records of institutional response, how the Inquisition itself chose to interpret, limit, and survive the accumulated implications of prolonged exposure to this Xenos phenomenon. Unlike prior chapters, these files rarely describe events directly. Instead, they document decisions. Redactions dominate the text, not to obscure facts, but to prevent synthesis. Marginal notes indicate that full compilation of all Attack Moon-related anomalies was explicitly forbidden following internal review. The reasoning, where visible, is terse. Correlation risk exceeds operational benefit. Pattern completion deemed destabilizing. One heavily restricted memorandum, circulated briefly among senior Ordo Xenos and Ordo Malleus officials, acknowledges that no single anomaly associated with Attack Moons violates established Imperial frameworks. However, it states that the totality of evidence produces a cumulative effect that challenges linear causality, reliability of material analytics, and the presumed separation between morale, belief, and physical outcome. The document does not advance a theory. It recommends compartmentalization as a defensive measure. Several classified files reference suppressed conclaves convened to debate whether Ork Attack Moons represent an emergent strategic intelligence rather than a constructed weapon. These discussions never reach consensus. Records show repeated rejection of intelligence attribution due to lack of command structure, planning coherence, or adaptive strategy consistent with known sentient war engines. Yet dissenting notes persist, arguing that intent need not be centralized to be effective, particularly within Ork societal mechanics. A recurring concern within these files is the erosion of predictive authority. The Inquisition relies not solely on force, but on foresight, threat categorization, escalation modeling, and controlled disclosure. Attack moons repeatedly undermine these mechanisms without overtly resisting them. Prognostication becomes unreliable. Outcomes deviate subtly but consistently. The threat is not that the Inquisition is blind, but that it sees too many plausible futures and cannot privilege one with confidence. One sealed Ordo Malleus addendum addresses the persistent absence of warp signatures, despite phenomena that resemble empiric distortion in effect if not in form. The addendum warns against doctrinal overreach, stating that misclassification would invite inappropriate countermeasures. There is explicit concern that ritualized responses, psychic intervention, or purgation protocols could amplify rather than suppress Ork operational cohesion. The recommendation is restraint bordering on deliberate ignorance. Inquisitorial psychological assessments included in classified files reveal another dimension of concern. Personnel exposed to repeated attack moon engagements exhibit elevated tolerance for chaos without corresponding stress markers. While superficially beneficial, this adaptation correlates with diminished reliance on procedural certainty and increased acceptance of improvisation. The files question whether prolonged exposure to Ork war environments subtly normalizes unpredictability, altering Imperial command culture in ways that are difficult to reverse. Several reports detail instances where Inquisitors themselves disagreed sharply over interpretation of identical datasets. Unlike typical doctrinal disputes, these disagreements do not align along Ordo lines. Instead, they fracture unpredictably, suggesting that personal perception plays an outsized role in assessing attack moon phenomena. One classified note observes that the subject resists consensus, not through contradiction, but through excess ambiguity. The most heavily redacted files concern termination protocols that were considered and then quietly abandoned. These include proposals for preemptive system-wide sterilization upon attack moon detection, long-term quarantines of sectors previously exposed, and suppression of civilian knowledge regarding the scale of Ork constructs. Marginal commentary indicates that such measures were deemed strategically unsustainable, politically destabilizing, or insufficiently justified by existing evidence. One document, marked for internal reflection rather than circulation, offers a rare moment of candid tone. It states that the Inquisition is accustomed to threats that declare themselves through corruption, blasphemy, or forbidden power. Attack moons do none of these. They are excessive rather than transgressive. They overwhelm systems through accumulation rather than violation. This makes them difficult to frame within the moral architecture of imperial justice. Final thoughts within these classified files do not present conclusions in the conventional sense. There is no ultimate classification beyond continued designation as extreme Xenos threat. Instead, the Inquisition records a posture. Attack moons are to be resisted materially, disrupted logistically, and isolated informationally. Engagement is unavoidable. Understanding is optional and potentially hazardous. The closing annotations emphasize that certainty itself becomes a liability in prolonged conflicts against Ork superstructures of this scale. The Inquisition acknowledges, without admitting failure, that some phenomena are better contained than comprehended. Knowledge, when it cannot be acted upon decisively, risks becoming corrosive. Thus, the Inquisition's final position is neither ignorance nor revelation, but managed uncertainty. The Ork Attack Moon is not declared unknowable, it is declared unproductive to fully know. Its classified files are designed not to enlighten future readers, but to shape their restraint. In the final archived line, repeated across several sealed dossiers in different phrasing, the same sentiment appears. The greatest danger posed by the Ork Attack Moon is not its weapons, its mass, or its anomalies. It is the pressure it applies to imperial systems of meaning, forcing adaptation without clarity. For the Inquisition, survival sometimes depends not on answering every question, but on knowing which questions must remain sealed.